Well, we don't usually think of Maryland Senate elections as being competitive. This year, though, the race for Maryland's open U.S. Senate seat has national attention. Not only is this race competitive, it could reshape who holds power in Congress. And joining us now is Dr. Malia Cromer, the director of the UMBC Institute of Politics. Good to see you.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, listen, this race is a big deal. I mean, you even saw with the debate we had. Chuck Todd comes to town. I think the whole of the United States is watching this.
Yes, it's the first time in a very long time that Maryland has had a really competitive Senate race.
Sure.
So we recently put out our poll that was conducted that last week in September, and the race is really shaping up at this point. We have Angela Alsobrooks with a lead outside of the margin of error, a 48 to 39% lead. But keep in mind that poll was conducted during that last week in September, and we know there's a very, very busy political season between the very start in October to that run up until November.
You know, what do voters make of these two when it comes to favorability, when the poll came out at least?
Right, so what makes this a really interesting race, I think, is that you have two popular candidates running.
Yeah.
So Angela Alsobrooks, as well as former Governor Larry Hogan, both have a favorability ratings that are above their unfavorability ratings, so they're well liked in the general electorate. The issue is, and the Alsobrooks campaign has done a good job with this message, is that she has really effectively messaged that it's not just a race against her versus the former governor, but her versus a Republican majority in the U.S. Senate, and that has really, I think, that is, I think, the key reason why we see her above Hogan right now, outside of the margin of error.
Well, one of the tricks that the former governor will have to do, or not one of the tricks, one of the strategies he'll have to do is find some folks in the electorate that maybe he didn't have in his camp before. How's he doing that right now when it comes to a coalition? Well,
it's not so much finding who he didn't find before, but rebuilding that coalition that he had before in those last two election cycles.
Okay.
So if you look back to 2014 and 2018, the Hogan coalition that was the winning Hogan coalition is all about about 30% of Democrats, and those are mostly moderate and conservative Democrats, closing the gender gap and then doing better than Republicans nationwide among black voters. And what we see now is that he's sitting at about 15% of Democrats, and he needs about 25 to 30 to be able to win. And Angela Alsobrooks has put some distance between her and the former governor in regards to female voters as well as black voters.
Did you ask, did economy come up in your polling, and is that one of the main issues that people are looking at when it comes to this race?
That's right. So we asked about a series of questions, a series of different topics, and asked folks to weigh in on how important these topics would be in determining their vote. So this is an area I think that Hogan has the ability to make some inroads. Economic issues do rise to the top. So the cost of living is a big deal for Marylanders, and messaging on economic issues is something the governor has been quite strong on in the past. That being said, Angela Alsobrooks has been successful in framing issues as not just his policy preferences, or not just what the governor believes in, but what his party writ large believes in. And that, I think, is the big issue facing Hogan. It's not him as an individual, but it's the larger political environment and the demographics of the state that lean very heavily Democratic.
I think at the beginning, folks were worried about, or the talk was recognizable. Did folks know who Angela Alsobrooks were? After these ads, I think we know who both people are at this point. They have paid a lot when it comes to ads on TV, I feel like.
Absolutely. So if you look at the trends in polling that has from the summer and now into the fall, what we see was originally over the summer was a really tightly contested race between the two, with Hogan even in some polls with a slight lead, and now there's clearly had been a changing of fortunes. And a lot of it, again, is because of control of the Senate, and honestly because of the larger political environment that Hogan finds himself in.
Yeah. And you just mentioned the Senate. There's been this national attention now. When did the tide sort of change on that? Because it was a quiet race for a little bit, and then it just sort of blew up.
Typically after Labor Day, you're going to see that influx of campaign spending. And why we're feeling so much of it here in Maryland is not just because of the campaigns, the Hogan and Alsobrooks campaign, but all the outside money that's coming in from different groups who have a vested interest in either Hogan winning or Alsobrooks winning. And that pouring in of money results in a lot of television advertisements that I'm sure your viewers see every single day on rotation. But I think it's important to note that the average voter, while it feels really repetitive, I think, to folks who really follow politics a lot, the average voter who maybe just are tuning in the last couple weeks, it doesn't feel repetitive to them. And so keeping on message is really important because you want to at least get a couple touch points in with an everyday voter.
A little bit of time left. I know you focus on state politics, but I do have to ask you about national when it comes to the race for president and what you make of it right now. You know, there was a disparity between the two, and then suddenly now we're tied.
Yes, I think it's the natural tightening of a race. We live in a really hyper-polarized political environment. Democrats like Democrats, and they don't like the other side. Republicans like Republicans, and they don't like the other side either. And so what we're seeing here is like a natural tightening of a really polarized electorate. I think it's important for folks to not look at polls as crystal balls, but look at them as snapshots in time. And recognize in these last couple of weeks that we run up to November, a lot of things can change, and campaigns matter. Campaigns have the ability to move the polls in those last weeks.
I know you stocked up on coffee and Red Bull and whatever else to make it through election day. Good to see you, as always.
Thanks for having me.